box smelled of forgotten things. Not just dust, but the specific acidic decay of old magnetic tape and brittle paper. It sat on my desk, a cardboard sarcophagus, tied with yellowed string, marked only with a single name, FINCH. My job at the Institute was to catalogue the dead. Not people, but projects. The grant runs out, the lead researcher has a breakdown, the results are unpublishable. The work gets boxed up and sent to my basement office, the place where theories go to die. This one, however, felt different. Inside, nestled between stacks of notebooks filled with frantic, spidery script, was a single unlabeled audio reel. It was heavy in my hand, cool and dense. The silence of the archive was usually a comfort, a thick blanket of quiet. But as my fingers traced the smooth edges of the reel, the silence felt thin. It felt like it was listening. The hum of the old reel-to-reel player was the only sound in the room. Its motor gave off a faint scent of ozone, a dry electric smell that clung to the back of my throat. I threaded the tape from the FINCH box, its plastic leader cool and stiff between my fingers. The archivist's creed is simple. You document, you don't engage. But my curiosity has always been a sickness. Dr. Alistair Finch had been a ghost at the Institute for 20 years. A brilliant somatic linguist who simply vanished, left his office, his apartment, or his life, all in perfect order, except for this box of research. I pressed play. Hiss. The soft oceanic roar of blank tape. I adjusted the levels, leaned closer. A sound began to emerge from the static, so quiet I thought it was the machine itself. A rhythmic, delicate clicking. It was organic, like insects chittering or knuckles cracking, but the pattern was too perfect, too clean. It repeated over and over, click, click, chatter, click. I listened for 10 minutes, mesmerized by the hypnotic pattern. It felt familiar, in a way I couldn't place, like a word on the tip of your tongue, but for a language you've never heard. I checked Finch's notes. His handwriting was a nightmare, a sloping, urgent scrawl. He wrote about glossal resonance, the physical impact of pre-babble phonemes. He called them unbinding words. According to his theory, the first sounds ever spoken weren't for communication. They were for shaping reality. His notes referred to this first recording as specimen 01, echo. An echo of what? He didn't say. Just pages and pages of calculations and frantic warnings about listening for too long. I finally stopped the tape. The motor spun down. The speakers went quiet. The thick, comfortable silence of the archive rushed back in. But, for a single heart-stopping second, the clicking continued. It was right behind my ear, dry and distinct. Click, click, chatter, click. Then, nothing. I spun around in my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room was empty, just rows and rows of silent sleeping projects. The sound wasn't just on the tape. The next morning, the fluorescent lights in the long, sterile hallway seemed to pulse. It was a faint, almost imperceptible flicker, but it felt rhythmic. My jaw ached with a dull, persistent throb, as if I'd been grinding my teeth in my sleep all night. I got a coffee from the break room, the ceramic of the mug feeling slick and cold against my skin. The coffee tasted bitter, metallic. Everything felt slightly off, like a photograph that was a millimeter out of focus. Ben, the senior archivist, found me staring at the flickering light. He was a kind, tired man with faded band t-shirts and a permanent air of resignation. He asked what I was working on. When I said the Finch collection, his smile tightened. "Ah, Finch," he said. taking a slow sip of his tea. Just catalogue the box numbers, Sarah. Don't read the liner notes. He told me he was an intern when Finch disappeared. He said everyone called Finch brilliant, right up until they started calling him mad. He lost his grammar, Ben said, his voice low. Started talking about how words were cages. Said he was looking for the one that could open the door. His warning, of course, had the opposite effect. I went back to the archive. The smell of old paper, now feeling less like history and more like a warning. I found the next reel. Specimen 02. Inhalation. The tape was cold to the touch. I put on the headphones this time, wanting to block everything else out. I pressed play. The sound that filled my ears was immense. It was the sound of a breath being drawn in. A slow, cavernous, impossible inhalation. It went on and on, without pause, without the slightest hint of lungs reaching their capacity. It was the sound of a vacuum, of a great and impossible emptiness preparing to speak. The air in the small room grew thin. I felt dizzy, my own breathing shallow and fast. I ripped the headphones off, gasping. I sat there for a long moment, my lungs burning, the phantom sound of that endless breath still echoing in my mind. I gathered my things, my hands shaking slightly. I needed to get out. As I stood up, I glanced at the long panel of glass that separated my office from the main archive stacks. In the reflection, for just a fraction of a second, I saw a shape standing behind me. It was tall, impossibly tall and thin, its form a wavering distortion in the old glass, like a heat haze. I whipped around. Nothing. Just my empty chair and the silent tape player. I was sure I saw something impossible standing right behind me. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were a cacophony of broken language. Sentences would start, then crumble into static. Familiar faces would speak, but only the rhythmic clicking from the first tape came out of their mouths. I'd wake up with my jaw locked, the muscles in my throat tight and sore. I started hearing whispers in the hiss of the air conditioning, seeing patterns in the water stains on the ceiling tiles. I knew I was slipping. Part of me, the rational part, screamed to stop, to put the box back on the shelf, to forget Finch and his unbinding words. But another part of me, an insistent, curious, hungry part, had to know. I went back to the archive late that night. The security guard, Arthur, just nodded as I swiped my card. I was the dedicated researcher, the quiet archivist. No one questioned my hours. The air inside was different in the dark. The usual scent of dust and decay was still there. But underneath it was something else. A faint, coppery tang, like old pennies or dried blood. The silence was heavier too. It pressed in on me. I felt, more than ever, that I was not alone. I found the third reel. Specimen 03, articulation. This one felt different. The tape itself seemed darker, almost wet. My hands trembled as I threaded it. This time I didn't use headphones. I wanted to hear it in the room. I wanted to know if the room would react. I pressed play. It wasn't a click. It wasn't a breath. It was a wet, guttural series of sounds. The sounds of a throat trying to form a word without the proper anatomy. Glottal stops, sickening pops, a low, resonant hum that vibrated up from the floor, through my chair and into my bones. It was the sound of immense effort. As the soundscape filled the small office, the overhead lights began to dim, their bussing filaments glowing a dull, sickly orange. I looked down at Finch's open journal on the desk. For a terrifying liquid moment, the letters on the page seemed to lift, to scroll. The neat academic text blurred, the characters twisting and reforming into symbols I had never seen, angular and alive. The low hum from the speakers deepened, and I felt a pressure building in my sinuses, a painful throb behind my eyes. Then I heard a new sound, a low, protracted creak from behind me. The heavy oak door to the archive office, the one I had locked and bolted when I came in, was slowly swinging open into the darkness of the stacks. Dr. Finch's notes said the final specimen was not a recording of a sound, but a recording of the silence after the sound was spoken. The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine and obsessive dread. I abandoned any pretense of my actual job. My world had shrunk to the contents of that cardboard box. I devoured Finch's journals, my own notes becoming just as frantic as his. He wrote that he had finally found it. A place in the remote Ural Mountains. A cave system where the rock itself seemed to absorb sound. He claimed to have recorded a local shaman, the last speaker of a dead dialect, uttering the unbinding word. He described the effect in terrifying detail. The air crystallized, the light bent, the very grammar of reality stuttered. The shaman, he wrote, had simply unraveled, came apart like a poorly sewn seam. I needed to know what happened to Finch. I used my archivist credentials to dig into the Institute's confidential server, a place I was absolutely not supposed to be. I found the sealed file, an incident report from 20 years ago. It was heavily redacted, but I could piece it together. Acute cognitive contagion, mass auditory hallucination, somatic degradation. The official story was a chemical leak in his private lab. The unofficial one, hidden in the censor's black bars, hinted at something else. They found his lab empty. No chemicals, no contaminants. Just his audio equipment and a single melted reel on the floor. Tucked into the digital file was a scanned photograph, the last one ever taken of him. It was a security camera still from the day he vanished. The man in the image was skeletal. His skin was stretched tight over his cheekbones, his eyes wide and dark. But it was his mouth that made me feel sick. It was open, stretched into a perfect, black, unnatural O. It wasn't a scream. It looked anatomical, like a speaker, a portal. He looked exactly like he was in the middle of foe, forming a sound, an impossible sound. I looked at my own reflection in the dark computer screen, and with a jolt of pure terror, I saw it. The same tension in my own jawline, the same hollowed-out look behind my eyes. The word was a contagion, and I was symptomatic. I knew I had to find the last recording. It wasn't in the box. I tore the archive office apart, pulling out dusty containers, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I finally found it, tucked away in a small lead-lined film canister on the very top shelf, hidden behind a stack of geology surveys from the 1950s. It was heavy, far heavier than it should have been. A simple label was taped to the lid. Specimen 04, resonance. And underneath, in Finch's spidery, desperate script, a final warning. A handwritten note on the canister read, "Do not listen. Become." I should have walked away. I should have taken the canister, buried it, and never looked back. But it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a pull, a terrible gravitational need. The silence in my own head felt wrong, empty. It needed to be filled. I took the final reel to the Institute's audio forensics lab, a room within a room, a soundproofed booth designed for perfect, untainted listening. The air inside was dead. The padded walls absorbed every scuff of my shoe, every rustle of my clothes. The silence was so complete, it had a sound of its own, the rushing of blood in my ears. The reel was a solid dull grey, unlike the others. It looked inert, ancient. I threaded it onto the high-end player, my fingers feeling clumsy and thick. My heart was a frantic drum against the absolute quiet. My hand hovered over the play button. Finch's warning echoed in my mind. Become what? A speaker? An echo? An open door? I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed play. There was no hiss, no static. There was nothing. No, not nothing. It was a silence that was not an absence of sound, but a presence. It was a physical force. It poured out of the headphones, a heavy, crushing pressure that pushed against my eardrums, that filled my skull. It felt cold, ancient, and vast. It was the silence of deep space, the silence of a dead world. And in that suffocating void, I finally understood. Finch hadn't recorded the silence after the word was spoken. That was impossible. He had recorded the source. He had recorded the thing that answered. The unbinding word wasn't a key to open a door. It was a name. A name you call out into the dark. And this recording, this was the sound of the thing that had turned its head to listen. The pressure in my head became an unbearable agony. I felt a seismic shift inside me, a rearranging of my own biology. The ache in my jaw intensified. No longer a dull throb, but a sharp, cracking pain, as if my bones were being reshaped. I tried to scream, to make a sound, any sound, to break the hold of that terrible, active silence. But my throat wouldn't work. No air would pass. My lungs were paralyzed. I clawed at the headphones, trying to pull them off, but my arms wouldn't obey. I was a prisoner in my own body. I opened my eyes and looked at my reflection in the thick glass of the booth's window. My face was pale, alien. My eyes were wide with a terror that was no longer entirely my own. And I watched, helpless, as my mouth began to stretch. My jaw unhinged with a soft, wet pop. My lips pulled back from my teeth, stretching wider and wider, forming a perfect, dark, circular O. It was Finch's mouth. It was the speaker. The word, the name, was coiling in the base of my throat, a physical thing made of silence and intent. It wanted to be born. It wanted to use my voice to unbind the world. And as the silent scream built inside me, I saw its shape in the reflection behind my own, tall and thin and utterly patient. Ben found me. He must have seen the light on in the lab, must have worried. He told the doctors later that he found the door to the booth unlocked. The headphones were on the console, smoking. The plastic around the speakers melted into a black, viscous slag. The final reel was a charred ruin on the player. And I was just sitting there, staring. My eyes were open, but I wasn't seeing. And my mouth was frozen in that silent, circular scream. They call it a catatonic state, a psychosomatic seizure. They have all sorts of clinical, sterile words for it. They don't have a word for what is really wrong with me. They can't. It hasn't been spoken yet. I haven't spoken since that night. I can't. My jaw is locked in this position. They feed me through a tube. The room is white and soft, and the silence here is supposed to be healing. But it's not empty. It's never empty anymore. The silence from the tape is always with me now. It's a low hum in my bones, a constant pressure behind my eyes. It whispers to me in a language of pure geometric meaning. It's teaching me. They gave me a notepad. They think it's therapy. I write on it all day. I fill pages and pages with the same thing, over and over. It's not a word they recognize, of course. It's just a jumble of letters, a string of symbols that looks like a glitch in the code of the world. But it is getting clearer. My handwriting is becoming less of a scrawl and more of a precise calligraphy. I am learning the shape of it. I am learning its grammar. Sometimes, late at night, when the nurses have gone and the hallway's dark, I look at my own reflection in the black window, and I see it. Not my face, not anymore. I see a tall, thin silhouette, a patient shadow waiting just behind my shoulder, and I see its mouth, a perfect, dark circle, waiting. It knows I am close. It knows that one day soon, I will finally get the articulation right. I will finally be able to speak its name.